Okay, structural soils. We'll start with, I'm not an expert on this. I feel, in fact, pretty ridiculous presenting on it, but here we go anyway. So this graphic that I showed in my last presentation is what started this one. So Flintlock, the company I work with, had done a study of native topsoil open wells versus structural soil in grates, and just a tree by tree comparison across a couple of streetscapes, and suggesting, in line with James Urban's work, that perhaps native topsoils are going to perform better than structural soils. Sources and resources that I came to this are, there's planting soils for landscape architects, which is available to anybody who's licensed or an ASLA member for free, by Barrett Keys, and then James Urban, FASLA. Put this over here for a second because I think this quote is appropriate. We were starting with the tree and working out, and somewhere along the way we realized that the whole issue was soil, which also echoes the work of large rangeland grassland ecologists like the Savory Institute out of Colorado and elsewhere, for instance. And I included this as well because this is just for you, John. Every project needs a Lorax. That's you right there. So soil concepts, there are a lot. Physical concepts, particle size, structure, bulk density, I think is pretty critical. Porosity, water movement, organic soils, soil fertility, soil biology. Most of y'all have probably seen this soil structure, soil texture triangle, and then the particle size, related particle size. I'm not going to get too much into that on this one because that would be a whole other presentation. But I think it's important to ask what we're asking of soils, especially urban soils. We're asking them to be planting mediums, to be topographical sculpting. We're asking them to hold up our structures and our surfacing. And then we're also hopefully we're asking them to do other things like water infiltration, retention, and filtering. So some of the main root systems of trees, historically, people think that it's taproot, heartroot, and then a lateral or sinker root system. However, reading around a little bit, some of the more recent research suggests that most root systems are surprisingly shallow. So 90% or more of all roots are in the upper 2 feet. Probably the upper 18 inches more likely, based on some of the other arborist stuff that I didn't get a chance to reference here, but like Trees in Development, I'm sure you know that book, John. I believe they suggest that most are in the 12 to 18 inch depth range. And what are they doing there? They're trying to get air and water, right? And hold the tree up structurally. And that even trees that we think of as like very deep taprooted, newer studies are suggesting that that's actually not as true, that their lateral roots are still sort of their primary ones. They do have some that go further down, but there's not any microbial growth, microbial activity further down in the soil. So while they do have a taproot that might go down 10 or 15 feet and then some smaller branches off that taproot, they tend to not be the sort of the primary importance of roots. So what do soils need? They need interactions with water, air, and sun, stable pH, nutrient cycling, mycorrhiza, and I'm sure lots of other things that I don't have words for or know about. But those are the dominant ones that I came across. So factors affecting root distribution are soil bulk density, aeration, and fertility foremost. The bulk density, I think, is a critical one, and it relates to compaction, basically. And root growth declines sharply with the increasing density of the soil. And then aeration, oxygen has to be immediately available to them in the soil. I spoke with Dr. Lisa Wood, a really kind and generous soil scientist that I've gotten to know a couple different times at the U of A. And her opinion, her suggestion is that in terms of long-term maintenance, structural soils are in many cases the best bet. She recommends that we consider the amount of area given to the soil, like median trees on Garland or out in front of the ONF, and species planted. Is the sycamore going to do really well with that small amount of soil? And then whether you put them in structural soils or other mediums, options for growth are always going to be limited to some degree by the soil availability, is what her suggestion. You can inoculate that soil with mycorrhizal hyphae based on, it can occur naturally, but you can also use things like biochar or compost mixes. And her sort of final comment that I took was, I don't have a problem with structural soils as a standard spec, understanding the limits for growth, given their urban conditions. Moving on to some of the work by Bartlett Lab and James Urban. Again, this is a 2005 study, similar to the one before. That's 14 months of growth. Again, the suspended pavement is in the foreground with notably larger, more robust trees, more leaves than the structural soil examples adjacent. This is a 2015 study that I don't think they've even fully completed yet, but they did some initial reporting on. So that 2014 installation, they had 6 different types: a control with 80% proctor, compacted control with 95%, silvicells with 80% proctor, strata. They weren't able to measure sand-based structurals, and CU structurals were both to 95% proctor, which is a pretty high level of compaction. And the trees were tulipopters, simulating a city sidewalk planting. Based on those plantings, the strata and the silvicell, the suspended soil groupings, seem to perform significantly better than the structural soils. Asking why, he suggests that it's net available soil. And I think this is actually Dr. Tim or Tom Smiley, and I can't remember, sorry. But so pure loam soil is going to be the most efficient as far as rooting opportunity for the trees. The suspended cells are going to be more efficient, and then the structural soils are going to be less efficient in allowing for root growth and aeration. So revisiting that, I don't know for sure. I didn't get a chance to work with Melissa on examples of better performing structural soil tree plantings, but to me, it's enough to revisit these questions. What are we asking of them? And given the high proctor density, the high proctor count, that suggests to me that level right there, the requirement of that in structural to allow for building on top of, is a seriously inhibiting factor to the aeration and for roots to be able to penetrate at a reasonable rate. And that we should at least consider amending the spec to have that not be the standard spec. Again, I'm not a soil scientist, and I'm Dr. Wood is, and she still recommends them, so I wouldn't say the issue's closed by any stretch, but given the other research that I've come across, it has suggested to me that looking at other soil mixtures or soil specifications may be a better option. And then I think it's also important to talk about things like water. Like structural soils are probably not going to do much as far as infiltrating water compared to, and we're also working on the cultural arts corridor, and they were having a lot of trouble finding native soils available for bioswales, and if blending in the screening can make that worse. And they came up with a layered soiling response to sort of do natural profiles. So anyway, these are 3 of our standard specs now. There's 2 structural soils and 1 with the soil cells. So my suggestion is that we take a close look at making this the more dominant one, and the opportunity maybe to consult with construction and management companies about the costing difference between structural soils and soil cells and uncovered natives, and Ted Hartzick with Olson, who is working on the Cultural Arts Corridor project, has suggested that, I think there's also a potential opportunity to have a standard soil spec or recommendation, because just saying native topsoil may not be helpful. When you sift or blend that topsoil, it breaks down the soil structure, and then you're going to have higher chances of compaction, less aeration, and so I think, given that there are experts around, that we could ask for recommendations that might help us to guide more healthy trees with more efficiency into the future. Thanks.